Cinematic ship combat is a high-impact ship-to-ship combat system that allows players to feel powerful in a high-stakes duel on the open seas. Hi, I'm Kyle Davidson from the Tall Tale Tavern podcast, and in 1 week we are releasing an 8-episode pirate campaign about a bunch of cereal people that live in a giant bowl of milk. In this adventure we're using a new system for ship combat, all under the umbrella of Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. When I was preparing to DM this adventure, I was very excited because I've always wanted to run a seafaring, or in this case, milkfaring, campaign. I hadn't ran any ship combat yet, and I wanted to know how to do it. So I went to look in the 5e rulebooks and found that there really wasn't a whole lot there on ship combat. There are some rules and stat blocks in the Spelljammer book and in the Ghosts of Saltmarsh, but I felt like they were lacking in a lot of ways and wasn't really giving what I was looking for. So I went out and looked for some other supplements made by other people, and it turns out there are a lot of different ship combat systems out there. And so my next few weeks were booked, acquiring these systems, reading through them, and figuring out what was going to be best for my table, and also what was going to be good for a Theater of the Mind podcast where it's supposed to be entertaining. What I realized is that there are a lot of good systems out there that are very well made, that are very good fits for other tables, but I wasn't really finding one that was going to be the perfect fit for mine. I ran a playtest with one of the systems to see what it felt like, and I realized that I was probably going to have to just make my own if I was going to get what I was looking for. And so here I am, after many rounds of playtests, and the ultimate playtest of running an 8-episode campaign for a podcast with these rules. Thank you very much to the playtesters, Ballista Kitty, Andy Rue, T-Rex, Valthorian, Natalie, and Becca. May the crew of the Dark Maiden who defeated the Captains Bombastic, Arthuritis, and Captain Jerry Seinfeld forever sail the high seas with their prized, cursed treasure. In this video, I'm going to start with an overview of the system, how it works, and what the major points are, and how it feels to play it. Then I'll go through each phase in more detail and finish the video off with ship stat blocks, environment conditions, ship conditions, and some final thoughts. This video is meant to give you a good understanding of this system so you know if it's going to be a good fit for your table. There are a lot of systems out there that are perfect fits for other tables, and there are a few that I really liked that I would recommend looking into. Those are The Naval Code by BS_Dungeon Master, Nautical Adventures by Ronnie Hart, Captains and Cannons by Drifters Games Workshop, and Lemithron's Guide to Naval Combat. First, I'll talk about my goals in creating this system. The most important thing to me is that players have fun playing this system, that they look forward to ship combat, and that they feel powerful, that their characters feel powerful when they play this system. Secondly, I wanted the combat to feel like a duel with another ship. A contested role against your officers on your ship versus their officers struggling on the high seas to see who can get the advantage for their cannon fire that round. Thirdly, I wanted something that was going to be relatively light on rules so that DMs and players can learn it fairly easily. And lastly, I wanted something that felt big. Something that felt like every round was high impact, that player decisions mattered. That's where the name cinematic comes from, where I wanted it to have this big feel like you were, experiencing a ship battle in a movie versus maybe a more realistic approach to sailing. This system is fantasy. It works best in a high magic setting like Faerun, where magic abilities exist and fantastical abilities are possible. In this system, there are 3 phases. An officer phase where players take actions that help the sailing of the ship, the sailing phase, which culminates to a contested roll against the enemy ship to see who the winner of that round is, and thirdly, the cannon phase, where each player gets to fire a cannon or other weapon aboard the ship. The most unique thing about this system is in the sailing phase, and it's called the helmsman check. The helmsman check is a contested roll between ships to see who can get the upper hand. One player is chosen to roll this D20 helmsman check each round against the enemy ship captain. Winning the helmsman check represents outmaneuvering the other ship, gaining an advantage during the cannon phase. Winning the helmsman check is a big deal, and something that the entire crew pitches in to help win. The other unique part of the system is in the cannon phase and how cannons work. In this phase, every player gets to fire their own cannon. In 5e, for siege weapons that take a utilize action, players usually don't get to add a lot of their own abilities to them. In this system, they do, and it's encouraged that players find unique ways to use abilities. This includes a fighter getting to use their action surge to fire off a cannon twice, ignoring the reload property, or a rogue applying sneak attack damage to a cannon hit, if he has advantage. Spell cannonballs are available, where a wizard can cast Fireball into a spell cannonball, load it up into the cannon, fire the cannon using his spell attack modifier, and when that cannonball hits the other ship, it does its typical 6d10 bludgeoning damage, plus 8d6 fire damage. Or the spell Enemies Abound is cast into a cannonball and launched at the other ship, and when it hits, that spell is activated, affecting the captain. Or, imagine a ship fires a cannon at you. The cannonball's about to hit, but then a shield spell is activated from the ship's spell core, increasing the AC of the ship by 5 for the entire cannon phase. The cannonball launches and shatters on an invisible force field surrounding your pirate ship. In the officer phase, players have unique roles where they can do an ability check to repair something on the ship, or give themselves advantage on a sail roll, or the cannoneer can aim for the rigging on the enemy ship to try and do more damage and take out one of their sail stations for their sail rolls. All officer abilities are meant for players to feel excited to use them so that they can have a big impact on the combat. If the officer actions go well, if they roll well for their officer actions, and they can roll well for their sail rolls, they can even roll well enough to have almost every shot that they take at the other ship be a critical hit on that ship. Overall, this system feels like you are working as a team to outsail another ship, and at the same time doing some really fun, cool things that only your character can do. It feels high impact, it feels dangerous, and if you can't tell, I love playing this system. So, let's get into each phase specifically. First is the officer phase. When ship combat starts, we go directly to this phase. Each player has an officer role that includes specific actions they can take. This includes the bosun, ordering ship repairs, the navigator studying the waves to help the helmsman with an evasive maneuver, or the cannoneer aiming for the rigging of the other ship. There are a list of support actions that each officer can choose to take instead that are impactful, like preparing your station to give yourself an advantage on your sail roll in the sailing phase, which we will go over next. Players can take these officer actions in any order. Typically, they require an ability check, like a persuasion or intimidation, to inspire or invigorate the crew. On the enemy ship, their officers can take an officer action from their own unique list. Their list is more simple, so the Dungeon Master can do them quickly and doesn't get bogged down with their own rule set for the NPCs. After each officer has taken an action, including the enemy ship, then we move on to the sailing phase, where the ships are trying to outsail each other. Each player helps sail the ship in this phase with their own roll called a sail roll. A sail roll is 1d6 and can be affected by the officer actions in the previous phase. For instance, if the navigator had successfully performed the navigate action, they would be able to roll 2d6 for their next sail roll instead of just the 1d6. All the sail rolls are added up, and then one player is chosen to roll the helmsman check. The helmsman check is representative of the captain calling out an order to a specific officer. Examples would include calling out to the barbarian bosun to pull harder on the sails, or calling out to the quartermaster to secure a gunpowder barrel that seemingly is coming loose, or calling out to the navigator, who's on the helm, to turn the wheel as far port side as possible. That player then rolls a d20 and applies modifiers. The helmsman check is a d20 plus your strongest modifier, say strength of +4 plus your proficiency bonus. If there's a ship modifier, say if your ship is faster than the other ship, that modifier gets added to this roll. This helmsman check plus the sail roll is added together and compared to the enemy's ship roll of the same fashion. The winner has outsailed the other ship and gets an advantage based on the degree of victory. A victory of less than 5 points gets you a +2 modifier to all cannon attack rolls, whereas a victory of more than 5 gives you advantage on those shots. If you are victorious by more than 10, not only do you get advantage to your cannon fire, but if you exceed their AC by 2, your shot is a critical hit automatically. Each player does the sail roll each round, and one of those players is also chosen for the helmsman check. It's recommended that each round a different player is chosen to roll this helmsman check. The enemy also makes these rolls as part of this contested check, and it is recommended that the enemy rolls their sail rolls and helmsman check first. I highly recommend sharing the enemy's sail rolls and helmsman check total to the players before the players start rolling, so they know what they're up against, and it adds a whole lot of suspense to that last helmsman check made by that one player when they know exactly what number they have to hit. If players are victorious by more than 10, they can choose a ram attack, which triggers boarding. Once this is triggered, ship combat is no longer in effect, and initiative is rolled and ran in the standard fashion. Cannons from the ship can still fire at the DM's discretion, firing every other round on initiative count 20 by other crew members. Boarding can also be triggered by a ship who has won the helmsman check if the other ship is below 50% of their hit point maximum. Once the helmsman checks are resolved, we move to the cannon phase. The ship that won the helmsman check goes first in the cannon phase initiative. If that's the player's ship, then the players all take their turns, taking their action and bonus action as usual. As their action, they can take the utilize action to operate one of the ship's cannons or other unique weapons. This is usually the optimal thing to do. These weapons are treated as ranged weapons, and players can apply many abilities to them that would normally not apply. This includes things like Battlemaster maneuvers to disarm one of the cannons on the enemy ship, a rogue applying sneak attack damage because they have advantage on their shot, or a barbarian using a contraption called a mechanopult, which is a series of pulleys and levers that allow them to pick up a cannonball and chuck it, doing their strength damage and rage bonus damage if they're raging. Paladins can use smite spells on cannonballs that hit, rangers can apply hunter's mark to ships, etc., etc. This is where a lot of creativity can come into play. And if you are a DM or a player that enjoys this shared storytelling, fantastical approach to abilities, where maybe some things are allowed that they wouldn't usually be allowed, this system is for you. The system does require some extra work on the DM's and player's standpoint, where it's good to have that communication before ship combat on how specific abilities will work, so it can be relatively balanced. And it's also important for DMs to share with players that whatever the player's allowed to do, the NPCs are allowed to do as well. On the rules PDF, there are several examples of martial abilities on how to adjudicate their effect. There are also different cannonballs that can be fired, including elemental cannonballs that do extra fire, cold, acid, lightning, or thunder damage. Everything I've described so far has been for the martial classes. But what about the spellcasters? Well, there are spell cannonballs and spell cores that exist in this world system that are very fun and very powerful. To use a spell cannonball, a spellcaster simply uses their action to cast a spell into a cannonball and fire it using their spell attack modifier. On a hit, the spell is casted on the enemy ship. The example I spoke of earlier was for Fireball, where the spell cannonball does its normal 6d10 bludgeoning damage plus 8d6 fire damage. Ships that are made of wood catch fire if more than 10 fire damage is applied to a single hit, so the ship lights on fire and will take 3d6 fire damage at the start of its next cannon phase. If the attack roll missed, then the spell is wasted. You might be asking what happens to the crew when a fireball hits the ship. In this system, damage that is applied from a spell cannonball is always done to the ship itself. However, spell effects can still target creatures on the ship. For example, if Enemies Abound is casted on the spell cannonball, on a hit, the spell is activated, and following the rules of the spellcaster chooses a target on the ship who is affected by the spell and must make the usual saving throw. If web is casted, the 20-foot cube of webs can cover a few of the cannons, and the creatures manning the cannons must make the necessary dex saving throw or be restrained, having disadvantage to their attack roll. Spells from spell cannonballs can be counterspelled, so ships may have a ship wizard aboard to help defend against powerful spells. Spell cannonballs are recommended to be relatively common in the world, but not in unlimited quantity, as spellcasters will outclass marshals if they can use a spell cannonball each turn. Another tool that can be available for a ship is a spell core. Spell cores are these large, 10 by 10 orbs, glass orbs swirling with smoke that you can cast spells into, and the spells that are cast into it can apply to the entire ship. This includes things like a shield spell. When activated, it provides a +5 to the AC for the entire ship for the whole cannon phase. Spell cores can have as many spell levels as it has available. An uncommon spell core has 1 spell level available, whereas a very rare spell core will have 5 levels available. Spell cores are very cool and also very powerful. Examples include casting Mirror Image, which creates illusory duplicates of your ship in the water, or Invisibility, turning the entire ship invisible. In the rules PDF, there are some examples of spell cannonballs and spell core spells and how to adjudicate them. Those are the 3 phases of ship combat. Once the cannon phase is complete, we go back up to the top with the officer phase. Ship combat ends when a ship has the sinking condition, when it's been boarded, if it's escaped, or if a ship has surrendered. So what do the actual ship stat blocks look like in the system? One thing I wanted to do was make sure that ship stat blocks were relatively simple, and I wanted to be able to easily create NPC ships on the fly that felt unique, but also didn't have a whole lot of stats to worry about in combat. Ships are categorized by number of masts. A single mast ship will be faster and harder to hit, but have less available cannon slots and hit points. A 2-mast ship will be a good balance of speed, damage, and hit points, and a 3-mast ship will be slower, but can hit harder, and can take more hits. The number of masts and speed on the ship are calculated together as a ship modifier value that is part of the helmsman check. This extra calculation only needs to be done if the ships in combat are of different mast size or different speeds. If they are the same in those regards, this entire calculation can be ignored for the combat scenario. Speed is denoted in single-digit values that represent 25 hexes of movement. A single-mast ship generally has a speed of 4, a 2-mast ship has a value of 3, and a 3-mast ship will have a value of 2. The number of masts a ship has gives it a modifier of its own. A single-mast ship has a +5 modifier to the helmsman check. A 2-mast ship has a 0 modifier, and a 3-mast ship has a -5 modifier. Putting this into practice, if a brigantine goes up against a galleon, those 2 ships have different speeds and number of masts, so the ship modifier should be calculated as part of the helmsman checks. If they were the same mast number and speed, no need to take this step. A brigantine has 2 masts, which is a +0 modifier and a speed of 3. The sum of those together is a +3, so players on the brigantine add a +3 to each helmsman check each round. The galleon has 3 masts, which is a -5 modifier, and a speed of +2. Adding those together, the enemy captain on the galleon has a -3 modifier they add to their helmsman check each round. Now, I mentioned the speed values earlier, and I also mentioned that this is a theater of the mind system. The speed values and the mast modifiers together, that's all there for the helmsman check purposes. For distance in this system, generally ship combat starts with the ships being 300 feet from each other, and each round they move 100 feet closer to each other, and they generally stay about 50 to 100 feet away from each other until boarding is initiated or one of the ships is sunk. When creating an NPC ship, I recommend starting with the base stat block such as a brigantine, then tweaking the stats as you see fit. Is the ship plated with armor? Instead of an AC of 15, bump it up to 18. Does the ship have a spell core with spells loaded into it? Is the ship itself magical and legendary, and have a recharge ability such as a breath weapon or misty step? Perhaps an enemy ship is a goblin raft that its main purpose is to initiate boarding, so it has a higher speed than a usual single-mast ship, and only one weapon, which launches goblins to the other ship. The other main thing to remember when creating an NPC ship is the stat blocks for the crew and for the captain. The crew is an important part, as you will use their stat block for rolling their sail checks. For instance, for a ship where the crew are pirates from the monster manual, their highest stat is dexterity with a +3, add their proficiency bonus of +2, and their officer actions each get a +5 when rolling for them. The captain is the most important part of the enemy ship, as they are the ones rolling for the helmsman check. Captains should be legendary, with multiple legendary resistances that they can use to re-roll helmsman checks or save on spell cannonball abilities. Because of how the helmsman checks are calculated, a good captain will be hard to sail against no matter what ship that they're on. You can also consider giving legendary captains expertise on their helmsman checks instead of adding their regular proficiency bonus. Now for some ship conditions. Cannon fire results in a lot of damage being dealt to ships, and at some point, ships will have a harder time sailing. Once a ship hits an HP threshold, it will have an effect. The first effect happens at 50% hit point maximum, where they are susceptible to boarding. At 25% hit points, ships have 50% movement, and helmsman checks and sail rolls roll at disadvantage. At 10%, the ship has 0 movement, and it automatically fails the helmsman check by more than 10. At 0%, the ship starts sinking and cannot be repaired. Ship combat ends at this point, and regular initiative is rolled. A sinking ship is very dangerous, and will completely submerge in 1d6 plus 2 rounds. Players have to make saving throws during this time to escape the sinking ship. If the ship submerges, players make a final save or be dragged down 120 feet in the water as the ship sinks, being restrained by the downward drag and repeating the saving throw at the start of each turn. In summary, you do not want to be on a sinking ship. There are different weather conditions, environment hazards, and other things like sea monsters that can affect ship combat. The most common is wind, which can be favorable or unfavorable. I won't go into the details of these, but basically these effects add a modifier to the helmsman check. If a sea monster such as a kraken shows up, the kraken takes its turn at the end of the sailing phase, prior to the cannon phase by the ships. Other effects like lightning storms, whirlpools, and Davy Jones being present are listed in the PDF. And that's the system. There's a few final notes I'd like to add. If the system seems broken to you in favor of the players, that's because it kind of is. There's a lot of opportunity for players to really scale up their abilities and really affect the battle in a lot of fun but powerful ways. The players can do some really cool things that they normally can't do, and that can pose a problem for balancing encounters. So it's important when you're planning these encounters to make sure you're scaling up the difficulty of these enemy ships. As with any campaign, you probably will start with an easier encounter so they can learn the system, but once players learn how to optimize the system and play it really well, you're going to want to scale up the difficulty for the captains pretty quick. In the PDF, there are some ideas in the DM tools section on how to scale up enemy ships and make sure that combat is still challenging for the players. And that's it. Thank you to all the people who have made it to the end of this video. The PDF is available up on our Patreon for $5. We are by no means a supplement making company. If you purchase the PDF, that helps support our show and also helps support the work that went into making the system. If you want to see the system in action, check out our campaign, Pirates of Ceramica, that's starting December 2nd with a live premiere on YouTube at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you're looking to connect and join our little D&D community, then check out our Discord, and we will see you on December 2nd.